Welcome to the Darkened Hour.
Hey, welcome to the Darkened Hour. I am your co-host, Adam Fitzgerald. I'm with today my very best friend and co-host, Richard Cox. Richard, how are you doing today?
Good on this sunny day in June, Adam. Having the good weather here, so yeah, pretty good today.
And it's a special episode here. It's not going to be very long, and it's going to relate to a past episode that we did with Mansoor Adayfi, who is a Yemeni that was held at Guantanamo Bay. And when we interviewed him, we were blown away at the very end because Adayfi went through many years of torture, and I believe might have been about 13, 14 years. I could be off by a
15,
year or two.
I think, Adam. 15 in
15?
total. From being a very
15
young
total?
man, I'm going to be off a year, but he was only about 20 years old, give or take a year or two when he went into that. So,
but I think what was really astonishing for me anyway is that here's a guy who basically could hate the world at this point, and yet he's one of the most kind and very rational and very lucid individuals who basically forgave even his captors for torturing him for all those years. Richard, you had to have been blown away by.
well, we were. I mean, I've done some interesting interviews. I've never done one that's impacted me more than that, right? And we sat there afterwards, kind of in silence for a few minutes, didn't we? Just like taking that in. And I think the thing for us was the question that it can't not bring up is what would we have done in that situation? Would we have
Yes.
maintained our humanity? There's no way I could say that I would have done so. I think you feel similarly, Adam, that it's quite incredible, and just put a very different spin on the role of religion or spirituality, in this case the Islamic religion, in sustaining that soul really through the experience. And to hear Mansoor explain that and what it meant to him and his fellow detainees there, we were, I think, shocked to silence really by the story.
For those who don't know, just a little bit of a rundown. Mansoor Adayfi is a Yemeni who was held without charge in the Guantanamo Bay detention camp from February 9th of 2002 to July 11th of 2016. He was considered a low-level al-Qaeda fighter, but he never joined al-Qaeda, actually. Traveled to Afghanistan in mid-2001. He never took part in the 9/11 attacks. He never took part in any terrorist activity, and he was held incommunicado in Guantanamo for many years. He was one of the few people that was held for indefinite detention until there was an administrative review for detainee enemy combatants at the military tribunal. It found that Adayfi actually was not a threat to the United States after many protestations by prosecutors here in the United States. And we were fortunate, Richard. We were very fortunate to get Adayfi only because we interviewed Mohammed Al-Slahi, who was actually a central figure to the government's narrative in the 9/11 Commission, because Slahi was considered the connection between the members of the Hamburg cell from Serbia to Afghanistan. Found out that Slahi never met any of those people. Well, Adayfi was falsely charged for being al-Qaeda, and he was never an al-Qaeda fighter. But here you have, Richard, 15 years of torture in CIA black sites, then transferred to Guantanamo Bay, which is basically a torture site itself, not just physically, but mentally as well. When you're in prison for that long, it has to basically take a toll on you when you know you're innocent. And here's this guy who basically just, kept on his strong faith in his religion. Now, I'm an atheist, but this goes to show you how positive certain religions are when it comes to the spiritual aspects of it and not just literal. And I think that's what basically made me and Richard Cox really. We were stunned at the end at the level of peace that he had within himself, and he was a very happy sort. To me, Richard, that said a lot. And you basically have written a poem for Mansoor Adayfi.
I have, Adam, for a couple of reasons. One, reflecting on just what we've been talking about, being struck by that ability to maintain one's soul through 15 years in a dungeon, basically. And the other aspect, when I write poems, Adam, I'm often interested in where these kind of archetypal themes that you find in literature or religions around the world appear in people's day-to-day lives. So just as an example, I wrote a poem about a story a young lady told me about dancing somewhere and realizing that everyone on the dance floor, although they were full of dynamic energy now, was going to be dead in 100 years' time. and she found this profoundly depressing, right? And my reflection was that, well, that's basically the Buddha's story, right? That's like this thing in Buddhism that you realize that life is impermanent, so you have to find a deeper meaning to it. But when that occurs in people's lives, they don't necessarily see it that way. So that's what I try to draw out. And with Mansoor, a couple of things jumped off the page of me. There was this particular episode. So a lot of the interrogators he describes as being like true believers. They really believed in the guilt of the men. And when they couldn't give any answers to these questions, that just led them to conclude that they'd been trained in anti-interrogation techniques. So they doubled down. So true belief is a factor. But there's one interrogator, the chief interrogator, the Mansoor met, who acknowledged to him that he knew he was innocent, and acknowledged to him that he knew a lot of the men there, the majority of the men there were innocent. So, but they was going to detain them anyway, because that's what the people needed. That's what Washington, D.C. needed. There were all these structures in place that needed to maintain this pantomime of fighting terrorism through detaining these men. And their lives were just sacrificed. And there's something chilling. And I think Mansoor really writes about how chilling that is, to see that level of cruelty being displayed. And the two themes that jumped out at me there. So the interrogator goes on to offer him all sorts of goodies in return for spying and reporting on his fellow detainees. So he'll get a better quality of life, he might get to see his family, and he'll leave with wealth. So this is like the temptation of Christ, okay, where the devil offers Christ all sorts of worldly goods in order, if only you fall down and worship him, right? So that's one thing. And the other thing that really left off me, the acknowledgement of innocent, was the story of Dostoevsky's story of the Grand Inquisitor in the Brothers Karamazov, where Jesus returns to the earth at the time of the Spanish Inquisition, and he's performing miracles, people love him, and then he's picked up by the Inquisition and detained and questioned by them. And the Grand Inquisitor acknowledges that he knows who Jesus is, but says the Catholic Church actually has decided to follow the devil, because Jesus can't bring anything good to the people. What he's doing is saying about freedom is only for a tiny minority. Like spirituality is not for the masses, and they would tear each other apart if they had it. So he has to be stopped. He lets him go, but he has to get him to stop doing his teaching, because the Catholic Church has become the opposite of that. Okay, and that chilling parallel leapt up at me from Mansoor's story. So that's really the themes that I tried to reflect in the poem.
When I read the poem, I thought it was a moving poem, one of your most moving poems I've ever read. And I think it would behoove for us to basically forward this message to Mansoor himself, because he's actually traveling currently, raising awareness for Palestine. He's also raising awareness for the Guantanamo trial that's currently happening. It's up to George Daniels now for next month about whether or not they want to move forward with Saudi intelligence being declassified on behalf of the victims' families. So there's a lot going on. I think this poem actually comes at a really good time. And I'll leave it up to you, Richard, to read it.
Just a couple of notes on the poem, Adam. It's taken very literally from Mansoor's book, Don't Forget Us Here, Lost and Found at Guantanamo. And as I read it, at some points I quote either Mansoor or the interrogator, and I can't show that visually, so I'll have to just say when I'm quoting them throughout. Okay, we'll begin. As a nod to Dostoevsky and the Grand Inquisitor, this poem is called The Grand Interrogator. The Grand Interrogator steps through the door. He closes it behind him as you sit, chained to the floor. He tells you he studies the holy word. He understands your situation, understands it's absurd. He knows you're not the man they take you to be, this Al-Qaeda terrorist, an absurd fantasy. You're a nobody from Yemen. It's all been a mistake. But he's here to help you, to set everything straight. A flood of excitement, your heart starts to race. Has the time come, inshallah, to exit this place? Interrogator quote. Work for me. I'll make your life here good. You'll leave a wealthy man. You know that you should. You'll take care of your family for generations to come. Nobody will be any the wiser as to what you have done. All these things I will give you if you will just fall down and work for me. It's the obvious choice. Don't you want to be free? End quote. The ache of false hope pierces your heart. Is this your test in which you must play your part? Be mindful of Allah, and Allah will protect you. Be mindful of Allah, and you will find him in front of you. If you ask, then ask Allah alone. And if you seek help, then seek help from Allah alone. Mansoor, quote, "If you know I am not who they say I am, and my brothers here are innocent, part of a sham, then why do you persist in torturing us so? Why the charade? Why not let us go?" Interrogator, quote, "But what would I tell the White House, Congress, and the Pentagon? How would I explain where all the terrorists had gone? How can I tell them now we have only innocent men here? That's an unpalatable truth nobody wants to hear. No, it's better to maintain this brutal pantomime. Besides, all wars have victims. Consider yourself one of mine. Our founding fathers set too high a price on liberty and justice and doing what's right. What people crave is security, you see, or at least bedtime stories, palatable fantasies." End quote. Will you betray your brothers? Will you act as a spy in exchange for some comfort items, empty promises and lies? The men who were dragged to this hole with you, the men who have shared their meals with you, who have been beaten with you, who have been tortured like you, who have taken care of you, who pray with you every day. No. "That's not what I expected," comes the interrogator's disappointed reply, perhaps unable to comprehend your reasons for why. "Book yourself," he says, as he walks out the door, leaving you as he found you, chained to the floor. The torture will go on for many years more as they continue to prosecute their phony war. Some men were murdered, written off as suicides, covering killing with packs of lies. All things of the earth, even life itself, can be taken away, but that hidden treasure remains unfrayed. That's what the Grand Interrogator can never understand, worshipping only the institutions of man. Since the devil took Christ up on high, he's made the same promise, told the same lie. They can never replace the life they stole, but one thing remains beyond them: they can never steal the human soul. Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard, for reading the poem. It was beautiful.
Thank you.